And let's go ahead and get started. So good morning and welcome to the 2021 virtual Tillamook County Children's Clean Water Festival. My name is Alex Lee Tigner. I am the Community Education and Engagement Coordinator for Tillamook Estuaries Partnership. And I am here today with my co-host, Bruce Carden. You want to say hello, Bruce?
Hi, I forgot I had myself muted. Hi, everybody. Glad you're back. Just a quick reminder, the art contest for the fish was due on the 17th, which is next Wednesday, and we'll be by on the 18th to pick them up from your schools. So be working on that. Remember, it has a writing piece with it, but it's a creative writing piece, so have some fun with it.
And there's information in packet number 2 or packet number 1 about the fish art contest. Also on our website, www.tbnep.org. There's lots of information about the art contest on there too and how you can enter. And today with us, we have Emily Sargent and Katey Astleford from Twin Rocks Friends Camp joining us for a special presentation about Wetland Wonders. But before I pass things over to them and get started, I just wanted to do a little housekeeping before we begin. So again, only presenters will have video and microphone. So that's myself, Emily, Bruce, and Katey will have the video and microphone during this program. But you can send us questions or messages in the chat. Your chat will only go to the panelists, so no one else will be able to see what's typed in there. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this program. So if we're not answering your questions in the chat, we are keeping track of them. And we'll ask Katey and Emily those questions at the end of the program. And we'll try and answer as much as possible as we can get through. This session is being recorded and will be available on our Children's Clean Water Festival webpage at www.tbnep.org soon, hopefully later today or tomorrow morning. And don't forget to also visit that website to check out our online exhibit hall, where there's other activities, as well as recordings from past webinars that you can do at your own pace. So if you happen to miss Crumple Watershed or Fishy Adaptations last week, you can go and see those videos online, or you can see other videos and activities from our partners all about clean water. So I'm going to stop this share and welcome Emily and Katey to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what we're going to be doing today.
Hi guys, we're excited to have you all here to join us. I'm Katey. I work in the outdoor education department at Twin Rocks Friends Camp.
And I'm Emily. Yeah, so thanks for being here today, guys. We'll watch a video that we made at Twin Rocks, and then yeah, we're happy to answer your questions afterwards.
Great, thank you, you two. And we'll go ahead and share that video. If you're following along with your packet number 2s, you do have a macroinvertebrate ID chart that you can learn about some of the macroinvertebrates, and you're going to learn all about what that word means in just a second. And then you also have some coloring pages that you can color in of different macroinvertebrates as we go through this video and the Q&A session. So you might have your markers from last week or some other thing to color with, and you can go ahead and work on coloring some of those pages in if you'd like to in your packet. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and we are monitoring. I've had some technical difficulties so far this morning. So we're monitoring that to see if the video is not coming through or if something happens, and we will make some changes if it's not working for everybody. So. We did experience a little technical difficulty there. Bruce told me he didn't have any sound. So I'm going to go ahead and try this again. If you don't hear the sound for the video, let us know in the chat and we will try another strategy.
TPP said video and sound look good from their end.
Hi, I'm Emily, Outdoor School Director here at Twin Rocks Friends Camp. Today I am down at our freshwater lake called Spring Lake, and I hope you'll join me on a class that we call Wetland Wonders. Wetlands are the area where the land meets the water, and our wetlands here are filled with all kinds of grasses and shrubs and trees. Wetlands are a really important part of an ecosystem. It's because it's the area where the land meets the water. Wetlands serve as kind of a giant filter for water that's coming down out of a watershed, which is a watershed is where when water travels from a high place to a low place. So water comes down off of our hills and mountains here around camp, and it filters down into this lake. But the wetlands, the area before the lake, captures some of the debris or pollution that might be coming out of that water. So they are a really important part of an ecosystem. Now down here at the lake, we are going to be looking for some pretty cool creatures. We're going to be looking for things called aquatic macroinvertebrates. Now the word aquatic means living its life or part of its life in water. Macro means you can see it with just your eyes. You don't need a microscope. You can see it with just your bare eyes. And an invertebrate is a creature that doesn't have a backbone. So mostly we're looking for insect-like creatures that are going to be down here in the water that we can see with our own eyes. And the way we're going to do that is by using some tools to look for them down in the water. So if you look over here, I have the tools that I'll need down on the table. I have a couple different types of nets that I would use to scoop in the water, and I'll show you how we do that in a little while. You want to find mesh net, one like this. You could get it at a local pet store, and that works great. Or I like to use a dip net like this. This is a larger one, and the mesh in the bottom of this dip net is much more fine, so it's going to keep a lot more of these small creatures in the net rather than dripping through back into the water. You want some containers to hold the creatures in, so I have little glass jars or clear buckets. Generally things that are clear or white are going to be best so you can see the creatures once you've gotten them out of your net. And then some magnifiers, because although we can see these with our own eyes, magnifying them really helps to see the details. I also have a variety of ID charts that I use to identify these creatures that I'm finding. So a field guide like this one about streams, the ecology and life in the streams or lakes, as the case may be. But I also have a couple of other macroinvertebrate identification keys and charts. Now, these macroinvertebrates, not only are they fun to look for, but they're also really important. There are lots of scientists that will study macroinvertebrates because macroinvertebrates are what we call an indicator species. And that means that the presence of certain macroinvertebrates in a body of water can indicate how healthy that water is. Because some of these creatures are very, very sensitive to pollution. So if the water is even a little bit polluted, they can't live in the water, they can't survive there. Whereas other creatures are much more pollution tolerant, and so they can live in water that is moderately to heavily polluted. So what we would hope for is that as we are looking for macroinvertebrates in our lake here, that we're going to find macroinvertebrates that fall into this sensitive category, that are sensitive to pollution, because that would indicate that we have a clean lake. So when I am searching for macroinvertebrates, like I said, I'm going to use a tool. This dip net is the one I'm going to use. Now these creatures will typically be living in the grassy area. So you can see here that we have these shrubs and grasses coming all the way down, even growing into the water. And that's what they're looking for. They take shelter in those grassy areas. And a lot of these creatures will not live their whole lives in the water, and so they stay close to the grasses, because as they grow from nymph stage into their adult stage, they're going to go through a metamorphosis and they're going to emerge out of the water. But in order to do that, they need to be near something that they can climb on to get up out of the water. So that's why I'm going to be looking for macroinvertebrates in this grassy area. So I'm going to dip the net in, kind of scrape it against the bottom and some of these grasses. And then I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to take a look down in the bottom of the net and see if I can see anything moving around in there. Takes a little bit of patience. And I don't see much movement at this time. So I'm going to do another dip. Well, I've gotten a couple of freshwater snails. Oh, I saw a little movement right there. If you can see under my, right where my finger is, there's some small little creature moving there. So in order to find out what this is, I'm going to take it over to my table. I'm going to put it in one of those dishes, and then I'm going to try to identify it. So after looking at my ID charts, I believe that this is a young dragonfly, a very young dragonfly nymph. As this one grows, it's going to eventually become the size of the one we see in this tub here. You can see right there where my finger is. This is a large dragonfly nymph, probably just about ready to make the transition to go through the metamorphosis to become the dragonflies that you and I see flying around lakes and streams with their beautiful wings. So some other interesting things that we've found down here at the lake today. This right here is the casing. Let's see if I can get out of the dirt a little bit. The caddisfly casing. So some of these creatures build a protective casing around themselves using sticks and leaves and just whatever debris they can find in the water, and make these great little sort of tubular casings for themselves. And right here on another casing, we actually have a mayfly, a mayfly nymph. I'm going to see if I can get it to come off of there a little bit so you can see him better. A mayfly nymph, so we found this one in the water as well, and this macroinvertebrate will also go through some changes just like the dragonfly, and will become an adult that leaves the water, grows wings, and flies off. Earlier today, we actually had another mayfly in the water here, but it hatched. So just as we were filming this today, it hatched. So you can see it's the body that it left behind, sort of the shell of its body, and its wings came out, and it made its change all within just a couple hour period. We found a young crawdad as well. If we can get it to swim around a little bit, you can kind of see the shape of its body there. Oh, there we go. Swims around similar to a shrimp. Has kind of that curled back tail, and you can see two pinchers in front. So in my net, you'll see this little beetle-like creature here. Well, he is a beetle. We call it a riffle beetle, and I'll show you what it looks like when he's in the water. In here you can see some things moving around that look like little shrimp almost. The way they move, they kind of curl up like that. These are called scuds. These are very common. They're like the ants of the freshwater system. They're a very common little macroinvertebrate. Almost hard to see with our eyes, but you can see the movement in there. I have an identification chart here that sorts the macroinvertebrates by their pollution tolerance. So we have some that are pollution tolerant. We have others that are moderately tolerant, and then we have others that are sensitive. So based on what we have found today, we have found a few species that fall into this pollution tolerant category, like scuds and whirligig beetles. But we also found some species that fall into the moderately tolerant category, like mayflies and stoneflies, and the crawdad that we found. So I think it's pretty safe to say that our lake is moderately healthy as far as pollution goes. Our lake does have a lot of color to it. It's a very dark lake because we're surrounded by deciduous trees all along the border. When trees lose their leaves, the leaves release a chemical called tannin, and tannin is a brown color, and so that tannin gets released into the water, making the water in our lake very brown. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's unhealthy. It just has a lot of tannin in it. It is also slightly turbid water. There's lots of particles of silt and sand in our water as well. But based on our chart, I think we can say that the water in our lake here is moderately healthy. Next time you find yourself down at a freshwater lake or stream, keep your eyes out for all kinds of interesting creatures. You never know what you might find. The ones that we found today are just a small sampling of some of the macroinvertebrates that you may find. So have fun, keep your eyes open, and be safe.
All right, thank you, Katie and Emily. That was a fantastic video learning about macroinvertebrates and the things that we can find in our local wetlands. So Bruce is going to join me. He's been monitoring our chat for us. And so if you want to submit any questions to Katie and Emily, we can go ahead and we'll ask them here on the webinar. And just if you want to color along too, you can look for some of the macroinvertebrates that we saw in the video today. See if you can find those on your ID chart, or if you can find them in the coloring pages. And then you can color those in as we're asking the questions. So Bruce, go ahead, and if you want to start asking some questions, I'll also open up my chat so I can see what we've got. Your camera's off. My camera is not off, so I don't know what's happening.
Okay, so welcome. We are a lot of comments and stuff, people that have been there to the camp, which is really cool for you guys to know that your camp's being used, and hopefully you'll be able to get it used again this year, get things up and running, because that's pretty exciting stuff. One of the, it's not really a question, but it was like, beetles live in water? Exclamation mark, question mark. So this enlightened that person. They didn't know that beetles lived in water. Or would you find them the same as the rest of the macros that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is interesting. We don't think about beetles living in the water, but there are a few species. Most of them are pretty small that that you're going to find in the water, but they're pretty fun to watch when they swim around, because they kind of swim in these like circular patterns. So if you see them swimming really erratically in the water, it's probably a whirligig beetle, also known as a riffle beetle.
Okay. One question is, hey, is plankton the same thing as the macroinvertebrates, or are they different?
Great question. Plankton is actually defined by things that can't really move on their own. So plankton, we think about plankton as being like out in the ocean. Often it's too small to see with our own eyes, so it would be microscopic because we would have to use a microscope to see it. But plankton just floats. So it's just at the mercy of the waves out in the ocean. Whereas these macroinvertebrates, most of them have body functions, ways that they can maneuver themselves in the water. So they don't just have to float with the currents, they can actually move around. Great question.
So then that would help them to get away from predators?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty important stuff. You know, there's not a whole lot of questions coming in. A lot of good comments about how cool the video was and very educational. It was very well done. So it seems to meet the needs of everybody. I don't have a whole lot of questions coming through here, but one of the things that crossed my mind is that looking at the camp, I've always done macroinvertebrates in a creek or a river. I've never done them on a lake before like that. So they live in lakes as well?
They do, yeah.
Yeah, but like Bruce said, you can find them in rivers and streams. So if you don't have a lake, you know, that you can get to, and if you want to go find macroinvertebrates because you're kind of interested in this now, you can go to a stream. You know, we have lots of streams in our areas, or rivers. Be really careful around the rivers, right? Just stay right on the stream, like right on the edge. I mean, right on the bank. But you can find macroinvertebrates, yeah, in rivers, and creeks, and lakes.
Yeah, and then the video, Emily said that in lakes they grow on, or they live on the grass and the weeds that are alongside the bank. In streams and rivers, sometimes they'll be under rocks, so sometimes looking there is a good spot to find macroinvertebrates in those areas.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one. I worded a little bit differently, so I'll try to fix it. But so how do animals first start off being in the water and then transform into something that can fly around out of water?
Yeah, isn't that amazing? So these creatures start off looking nothing like what they're gonna look like when they grow up. So when we think of, you know, a human baby looks quite a bit like a regular human, right? Most mammal babies look like the animal that they're going to become when they grow up, but that's not the case for these insects. So when they first hatch, usually, and they're a larva, they're going to look very different from the creature that they become, because they're going to go through metamorphosis. And I bet you guys have heard the word metamorphosis in reference to lots of different insects like butterflies, but some actually go through metamorphosis, allowing them to start living in water, but then when they grow up, out of the water. Pretty amazing, isn't it?
Very cool. So,
and a lot of the ones that we saw at the lake are not ones that we think of when we think of bugs. Dragonflies are pretty common, but mosquitoes are another one that will start out in water as larvae and then grow and become adults and fly around.
Cool. So mosquitoes a macroinvertebrate?
Yeah.
Because it meets the definition.
Yes, it meets the definition. That's right. Macro, we can see it with our eyes. It's an invertebrate, so it's an insect, and it's aquatic because it starts its life living in the water.
Cool. So question, what do macros eat, or what eats them? So first off, what do they eat? And then secondly, what eats them?
Yeah, good question. They're an important part of the food chain. Most of these macroinvertebrates are going to be herbivores. They're going to eat the leafy debris down at the bottom of the, in the lake, in places they can find. Although it is likely that some of them will actually eat each other. So there are some macroinvertebrates that will be carnivorous and that might eat other macroinvertebrates in the water. But then they are eaten by lots of things. So stoneflies and caddisflies and those type of creatures are really popular. Fish really like to eat them. So fishermen will use them. Like if you've ever seen them fly fishing, they're going to try to create the flies for their fishing rods that look like caddisflies and mayflies because fish really like to eat them. And then birds as well. So fish and birds are probably their main predators.
Somebody wanted to know where they could get one of those big dip nets. Where do you
gosh, the big dip nets, you might have to go to like a sporting goods store. So probably the sporting goods store in Tillamook. I think you could find one of those big ones. but the little dip nets, like the little green ones, or the blue one like Katey has, yeah, you can find those even at Fred Meyer or at a pet store.
Okay, very good. And then, do you see any difference in species that inhabit freshwater and or saltwater environments near wetlands? I guess kind of like, is there a difference? Will I find the same macros in freshwater and saltwater, or maybe in a lake as opposed to a river or creek?
That's a really good question. You know, the closer you get to the saltwater, I would imagine you're going to find some different creatures. But I think there's some kids out there that should do that experiment, because I don't know, most of the macroinvertebrates, most of the times that I have gone searching for macroinvertebrates, I've, you know, used lakes and streams and rivers fairly far upstream. So not right at like the estuary kind of point. So there probably is a difference that you're going to find.
I think I don't know if you guys can see me or not, but I'll chime in. I think what you'd start to see once we get to our saltwater stuff is things that you would find in our bays that when they're adults. So things like little tiny crabs or crab nymphs and larvae, things like little different types of snails and things. Once we start getting into snails that can withstand more salt water, we'll start to see those. Trying to think of what else. You definitely see things that look really similar as far as like the scuds, things that look very similar but are maybe a different species, because they can then tolerate that salt water.
Somebody wanted to know what the lifespan of these different critters are. I'd imagine for a mayfly might be different from a caddisfly, but what's the average?
Yeah.
Great question, Katey. Do you know more about that?
I don't know a ton. Because they're so small, sometimes they're hard to keep track of and measure the lifespan, but a lot of these guys are probably going to go through that metamorphosis cycle within the first month of them hatching out of eggs. So it's a pretty fast process a lot of the time. And so then they'll enter into their adult lifespan, which varies depending on the species too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and that brings up a good point. This time of year, spring, is a great time to look for these macroinvertebrates, because this is the time of year that you're going to find most of these creatures in their larval stage. And then by summer, they're going to be in their adult stage. So if you, you guys live around here, so you've probably seen the dragonflies flying around in the summer. Most of these creatures are only going to live for one season. So they're going to hatch in the spring. They're going to reach their adult stage in late spring, early summer, and then they're going to mate, and they're going to, and by the next season, they will be dead, but their offspring will be alive.
One of the cool things that I saw just took place is, Emily, you didn't know right away, so you went to another resource to find that information. And even Katey was like, well, I think this is, and we're always learning. And then one of the things is, just because we're on here doesn't mean we have all the answers. But when we want to seek out answers, we do more research to find those answers. And it's always a progressive learning process that you guys are going through. So don't think, man, I'm finished learning, I don't have to learn anything else. It's an ongoing thing. So keep that in mind. One of the questions they have are, hey, are salamanders invertebrate?
Great question. We have a lot of salamanders in our lake. If you've ever been to the camp, you've probably found some salamanders. They're actually called rough-skinned newts. But they are not macroinvertebrate because they do have a backbone. They are an amphibian. So they are an important part of our lake ecosystem. They do eat some of the macroinvertebrates that are in the lake, but they themselves are not a macroinvertebrate because they have that backbone.
Cool question. Do any of the insects we learned about have more than one heart?
Whoa, more than one heart.
Yeah, I assume they have hearts. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely have circulatory systems, right? So they have ways of getting blood to pump around their body, getting things around their body. But as far as having more than one heart, I don't know. Good question, though.
That sounds like another one of those research questions that we'd love to hear. If you do get really interested in learning more about macroinvertebrates and you decide to do some research, you can send us some information too, through our website or through email, or through your teachers can also send us some information. And so it's a little after 10:30. And I'm not seeing a lot of new questions pop up. So I think we're going to call the webinar. And I want to say thank you so much to Katey and Emily for joining us today and for creating that wonderful video. And even though we didn't get to go out to Twin Rocks Friends Camp for Clean Water Festival this year, it was really wonderful to get to feel like we were out there and getting to search in the wetlands and discover what is there that we might not see every day. And I just want to let you all know too, we've heard that folks have been having a lot of fun doing the projects for Clean Water Festival and creating our watersheds and maybe doing some of the coloring and things like that. So if you do have anything that you want to send us, you can send us, you can have your teacher take photos of some of the work, or you can send them to your teachers and they can send us some of those emails or some of those photos, and we can share them on our website. We'll start creating kind of a great page at the bottom of our website there for Clean Water Festival that'll host some of the photos of all the activities and artwork that you guys have done as part of this. So thank you everyone for joining. Tomorrow we will have some folks from Jackson Bottom Wetlands joining us to talk about the water cycle. And you do have a pre-activity in your packet to create a water cycle wheel. So go ahead and get that done and get ready for incredible journey tomorrow. Anything else, Bruce, before we sign off?
No, I think that's a very good report. Yeah, keep those bags handy for that water cycle thing. It'll be exciting tomorrow.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we will welcome you tomorrow. And this has been recorded and will be on our website soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Katey and Emily.